Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 12th of May, 2023, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen. Welcome to the program, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
And live from Damascus, we've got Vanessa Beeley joining us via video link. But we're going to get kicked off here, Patrick, with Ukraine and the elusive spring offensive.
Yeah, just a bit of an update here. This is the main story that's circulating around Ukraine here. And we're calling this, there's the president looking worried, looking stressed. More on that in a minute. The elusive spring offensive. They've been hinting at it, they've been threatening at it, and it hasn't really materialized. But we're told, Mike, in the last 24 hours that there is sort of an offensive happening, but it's not that clear if it's actually an offensive. And Zelensky said they're not ready for the offensive yet, but yet other ministers are saying the offensive is coming at the end of May. And I've also heard another one, which is that the offensive will be in September, and then another one right before the election. So there's lots of different offensives that have been promised and threatened, but none actually have materialized here. Let's take a look at this. So this is the mainstream media, UK, Telegraph, Ukraine. Russia's denying any breakthrough in Bakhmut by the Ukrainian forces. So they claim they've recaptured 2 kilometers along the front line there in Bakhmut. Russia's, of course, denying it. So the information war continues here. And just to spice up the room a little bit here, Prigozhin is also weighing in as well. So
this is the head of Wagner.
The head of the Wagner private military company there. And so Putin's troops suffering worst expected scenario near Bakhmut, says Wagner chief Prigozhin here. And so there's a lot of this sort of thing going on. And meanwhile, Zelensky released this video yesterday, Mike, and a lot of people commented he looked really rough. And we've got this clip here. He was looks like he hasn't slept for a few days. He's sort of fidgeting. He looks like he's under duress, under severe stress here. He's also been releasing a lot of inflammatory statements on Twitter, or his handlers, whoever's writing it, in English. It's really strange stuff, like threats and then all sorts of platitudes about the conflict, etc. So here's one of them here. So Zelensky's promised it's going to end badly for those in the Kremlin. Those who are in the Kremlin, believe me, they will end badly. I don't know how, to be honest, but I would like it to end quickly. But they definitely won't end it. But they definitely won't end with their death. Not sure what that means.
No, that seems a bit strange.
And to be honest, Mike, I don't think Zelensky knows either. But Dmitry Medvedev, the hawkish former Russian president here, he's responded on Twitter to the death to everybody in the Kremlin threat by Zelensky, saying the creature in green wished death on everybody in the Kremlin and not at his own hands. We do not know how anyone will die, for God's way is inscrutable. But the junkie in Kiev has a chance to die by his own hands, to die by cowardly suicide, like Hitler having swallowed dog poison, says Dmitry Medvedev. So the war of the words,
it's ramping up as the pressure builds.
It can't get any hotter than it is right now. A lot of people believe that something's going to break. Something's going to happen, possibly with Zelensky. His head military commander of the Ukrainian forces was not present at the NATO meeting, the normal briefing. He wasn't there. They sent a lower level representative. So this is also, there's questions in the air. Where is the head commander of the Ukrainian forces?
So the question is, will it end up with an expansion of the war in some way, because Ukraine is not succeeding? Yesterday, Ben Wallace in the House of Commons decided that he was going to announce that Britain is supplying Ukraine with longer range missiles. These are Storm Shadow cruise missiles. The manufacturer says these have a range of 155 miles. And you compare that with HIMARS, they have a range of 50 miles. So these are longer range. But here's the thing, Patrick, these things are launched from the air. My question is, who's going to be launching them? Are they just going to be able to sling them under a couple of MiGs? Obviously the Ukrainians saying that have been saying for quite some time that they need these weapons because they obviously don't feel that they can use missiles fired from the air. Their aircraft are targets. Their aircraft are being shot down, so they want longer range missiles that they can launch from further away from the battlefront, is what they're saying. But the question is, can you just sling these under a MiG? Or do they have to, as the photograph shows, do they have to be slung under a Eurofighter, a Typhoon? In which case, is it going to be the British that are firing them? Is it the Polish? Is it the Slovakians? Who's going to be firing these?
Well, one thing's clear is that it probably not going to be fired from a jet that's being housed on an airstrip in Ukraine itself. More likely, we're talking about Poland, possibly another location. So that's the other part of this. It's got triple redundancy, 900 pounds warhead explosives. This is a serious weapon. Mm-hmm. So imagine if this cruise missile was used, Mike, to hit a target in Russia, within Russian territory, a city, a facility, or if there's civilian casualties as a result. I don't have to tell everybody what that means in terms of escalation.
Well, indeed. So first of all, let's have a look at have a listen to what Ben Wallace said about this yesterday.
In December, I informed the House that I was developing options to respond to Russia's continued aggression in a calibrated and determined manner. Today, I can confirm that the UK is donating Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine. Storm Shadow is a long-range, conventional-only precision strike capability. It complements the long-range systems already gifted, including HIMARS and Harpoon missiles, as well as Ukraine's own Neptune cruise missile and longer-range missions elsewhere gifted. The donation of these weapon systems gives Ukraine the best chance to defend themselves against Russia's continued brutality, especially the deliberate targeting of Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, which is against international law. Ukraine has a right to be able to defend itself against this. The use of Storm Shadow will allow Ukraine to push back Russian forces based within Ukrainian sovereign territory. I'm sure the House will understand that I'm not going into further details of the capabilities, but while these weapons will give Ukraine new capability, members should recognise that these systems are not even in the same league as the Russian AS-24 Killjoy hypersonic missile or Shahed Iranian one-way attack drones, or even the Caliber cruise missile with a range of over 2,000 kilometres, roughly 7 times that of the Storm Shadow missile. Russia must recognise that their actions alone have led to such systems being provided to Ukraine. It is my judgment as the Defence Secretary that this is a calibrated and proportionate response to Russia's escalations.
So that's Britain's position. It's calibrated, its response. It's not so serious because it's only a seventh of the range of some of the weapons that Russia's using. But nonetheless, this is the Russian response from Dmitry Peskov. Russia is extremely negative about the supply of Storm Shadow long-range cruise missiles by Britain to Kiev. An adequate response will be required. And of course, the mainstream press this morning taking guesses as what is meant by an adequate response. What are your thoughts?
I couldn't tell you, and I don't really want to even imagine what that might be. But this is on the back, Mike, of a number of provocations, and we also saw, leaked intelligence, a potential scrape between Russia and Britain that was basically didn't happen because a missile misfired on an airplane. I mean, these are the types of situations that we're now encountering. And I wouldn't put it past NATO to basically adopt this as a strategy of firing missiles at Russian positions, either in Donbass or maybe further from Polish airspace, or using the cover of Polish airspace in order to mount more sophisticated attacks by air like this. So, I mean, we are getting into a period of escalation here. So I think there's a lot to be worried about.
Okay, so let's move on to NATO then, and their response to the arms situation. The NATO defence chiefs meeting was taking place over the last couple of days, and this is Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, the Chief of the Defence Staff, at that meeting. So they're talking about ongoing military support to Ukraine. They're talking about, Radakin was representing the UK in Brussels for the first time. And of course, Finland was there as a full member. Sweden was there as an invited guest. But again, they're talking about trying to ramp up the arms deliveries to Ukraine. It gets even better. The European Union, here's Thierry Breton, the EU Commissioner for Internal Markets, really saying the European defence industry has to see how Europe can move into a war economy mode. So don't worry about feeding people or providing them with proper healthcare. We've
Or
got to,
affordable gas and electricity.
indeed, we've got to move into a war economy mode. He went on to say, we're talking about expanding existing production, modernizing production, perhaps creating new production lines and new factories within plants that are already there, and also reconversion of old ammunition plants, which can be adapted to current standards. I think that within 12 months' time, with support, we will be able to ramp up production capacity to 1 million shells per year in Europe. So that is their aim, a war economy. What are your thoughts?
Well, it looks like Europe's gearing up for a long, smoldering, simmering war with Russia. So, this reminds me of the Soviet wartime economy. I mean, isn't that what Brussels is becoming?
Yes.
Have you seen their 3-year energy projection? They're banking on energy scarcity to run the European economy for the next 3 years. I mean, so the Soviet Union collapsed and was replaced by another Soviet, one that's based in Brussels.
So, in an effort to maintain arms flows into Ukraine, James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, was in the United States earlier in the week, hugging and kissing Antony Blinken. They're both very keen to make sure that we all know how strong the US-UK relationship is. They were very keen that we all know how great the cooperation was between them in dealing with the evacuation of nationals from Sudan, and how very keen they are that that there's a negotiated settlement in Sudan. But unfortunately, they're not so keen that there's a negotiated settlement in Ukraine. So let's have a look at what Antony Blinken had to say.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is a genuine pleasure to welcome my friend, Foreign Secretary James Cleverly, back to the State Department. We're also working hand in hand, as we have been for well more than a year now, to provide support for Ukraine as it defends its people and its territory against Russia's war of aggression. We applaud the UK's pledge to match in 2023 the $2.3 billion in military support that it provided to Ukraine during the first year of the war. In addition to training tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers, the UK is providing MLRS, Challenger 2 tanks, armored vehicles, anti-air missiles, and other military aid that will help equip Ukraine's defenders as they work to retake more of their nation's territory in the weeks and months ahead.
So in the past, we've heard the Americans criticizing the British military and saying how rubbish it is, but certainly for this meeting in particular, the rhetoric has changed 180 degrees, it seems. But they went on to talk about how both countries are focusing on defending themselves from China, because China, of course, is the next big enemy that's coming along. But that's not all, because both countries are very keen to work on what Blinken described as their agenda. So let's just listen to what their agenda is all about.
I think it's also important to note that even as we focused today, as we do, on Ukraine, on some of the challenges represented by our respective relations with China, we equally focused on a much broader agenda, and that is the needs, the concerns, the imperatives for people around the world as they deal and as we deal with the impact of climate change, food insecurity, as I've already mentioned, energy insecurity, global health, trying to provide for more inclusive economic growth through work that we and partners in the G7, as we're preparing for the leaders meeting of the G7, can help advance and support. That agenda is very much the focus of both the United Kingdom and the United States.
So there we have it, Patrick. We've got all the key agenda items: climate change, food, energy, global health. Now, when he's talking about an inclusive economy, he's actually referring to inclusivity in the sense of the culture wars, LGBTQ, and all this kind of stuff that's going on.
Equity.
And so on.
Equity.
Well, he was talking about inclusivity.
Everybody
But anyway,
gets the same. Everyone gets less, but gets the same.
Right, indeed.
But the gall of him, Mike, to say we need to address energy insecurity. The United States is directly responsible for Europe's energy insecurity, and no mention of the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipelines. Who did that? Was it Russia or was it the U.S. and its NATO partners? I think that had something to do with Europe's energy insecurity, Tony.
But the best quote of the meeting comes from James Cleverly. Are you ready for it? Here it goes. The world is a healthier, happier, safer, more prosperous place when the United Kingdom and the United States work closely together, and it's in our mutual interest to do so. It may be in their mutual interest, but I'm not certain about the rest of it. Vanessa, very briefly, is it just me that dies inside when I see a British Foreign Secretary make a statement like that? Because I don't see healthy and happy people around the world anywhere that the UK and the US have been in recent years.
No, I mean, the hubris is quite extraordinary, really, isn't it? No, there's nothing I can add to that. I'm sure most people understand the irony of that.
Yes, okay, thank you.
So they can just shuffle the foreign secretary after a couple of months, right?
Yes.
So he's in there now. There was somebody else in there by the end of the summer. The bench isn't very deep, though, Mike. I think they've pretty much exhausted the bench on the Tory side.
Yeah, well, indeed.
Who's left? Where's all the young talent?
Well, not in the House of Commons, but okay. Let's move over to across the Atlantic again, and Donald Trump.
So this was an incredible a spectacle, is the only way to describe it. So CNN decided to do the unthinkable, to host a town hall meeting with Donald Trump. And it was incredible. I think they lined up one of their best assassins, Caitlin Collins, to shoot him down. It was a whole litany of gotcha questions. She had her sheets there and did everything from January 6th, his sex trial in New York, the unfinished wall, what else? Election denial, everything. It was just one after the other. And Trump somehow came out and wiped the floor on this. But they didn't get a chance to do any questions with the audience. I thought that's what a town hall was for. It was really it was a trap set up to basically slay Trump on national TV. It totally backfired on CNN. His supporters are doing a victory lap. And then other people are saying they should have given him a platform. How dare CNN give Donald Trump a platform? So his poll numbers went up consequently after that. But one thing he did do incredible. I mean, he gave some answers to some questions that shocked a lot of us, including on the Ukraine question. She tried to do the purity test on Ukraine. Who do you want to win, Donald Trump? Russia or Ukraine? Who do you want to win? Kept asking him. And the answer he gave, I thought was, it surprised a lot of people. But let's watch this clip.
Would you give Ukraine weapons
I was
and
impeached
funding?
by a crazy woman named Nancy Pelosi.
But the question here is, would you give Ukraine weapons and funding if you were elected?
I would sit down. Let me just put it a nicer way. If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
How would you settle that war in one day?
Because I'll meet with Putin, I'll meet with Zelensky. They both have weaknesses and they both have strengths. And within 24 hours, that war will be settled. It'll be over. It'll be absolutely over.
Do you want Ukraine to win this war?
I don't think in terms of winning and losing. I think in terms of getting it settled so we stop killing all these people and breaking down this country. Now,
can I just follow up on that? You said you don't think in terms of winning and losing. Mr. President, can I just follow up on that because that's a really important statement that you just made there. Can you say if you want Ukraine or Russia to win this war?
I want everybody to stop dying. They're dying. Russians and Ukrainians. I want them to stop dying. And I'll have that done. I'll have that done in 24 hours. I'll have it done. You need the power of the presidency to do it.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
So that's the divisiveness. You see how the media operate. This was just a masterclass in how Machiavellian and underhanded the mainstream media are. And Trump somehow cut right through it and went around and got straight to the people. And you can see the reaction from the crowd. They are anti-war. Americans in general are anti-war. The media is not. The media is not, and nor is Congress and Senate. That's the problem we have. I think the same thing is true in Britain.
Yeah.
I think the same thing is true.
Okay, let's move to Turkey now, Vanessa.
Yeah, well, elections on Sunday, so only 2 days away. And of course, 2 days ago, there was the quartet meeting of Turkey, Syria, Iran, and Russia in Moscow to discuss Turkish occupation, annexation of Syrian territory, and normalization of political relations with Syria. We'll talk about in the next section. Hurriyet, who are considered to be kind of rather aligned with the current government of President Erdogan, are claiming that Erdogan will win the election in the first round. Basically, just to explain, if he gets above 50% of the vote in the first round, which is on Sunday, he is automatically declared president. If, however, it's a kind of a hung vote, he gets less than 50%, and the primary opposition, Kılıçdaroğlu of the CHP, the Republican Party, gets a high percentage, it will go to a second round on the 28th of May. So Sunday is an important day, obviously, in the election, and we'll see whether Erdogan comes through with a high percentage of votes. They're claiming an 85% to 90% turnout, which is pretty high. Now, when we're talking about interference in elections, it's kind of interesting what's going on in Turkey at the moment. There is a definite battle going on between the non-aligned axis, the so-called multipolar axis of Russia and Iran, and China to some extent, and then, of course, Syria, and the US. The US is very much coming down on the side of the Turkish opposition leader, Kılıçdaroğlu of the CHP or the Republican Party, as is the media. If you actually take a look, just do a search on whatever engine you use, and you will see the majority of Western media supporting in one way or another the opposition to Erdogan. So the Turkish opposition, this is where the interference comes in, and it's kind of quite funny. It's very clearly defined who is supporting who by the rhetoric that's coming from both candidates. So the Turkish opposition leader accuses Russia of spreading conspiracies, deepfakes ahead of election. This is just after another opposition member basically pulled out of the race after sex tape allegations. And then if you go forward, Kılıçdaroğlu went on Twitter and said to his Russian friends, "You're behind the montages, conspiracies, deep fakes, and tapes that were exposed in this country yesterday," without providing further details. If you want our friendship after May the 15th, get your hands off the Turkish state. We are still in favor of cooperation and friendship. So a clear threat there from the CHP party. As I mentioned, the mainstream media are definitely pushing Kılıçdaroğlu as the politician touted as the future of Turkish democracy. The Guardian is a pretty good example of the media headlines in the West. Going forward again. But if you remember, in 2016, there was a CIA-backed coup to effectively remove Erdogan from power back then. And then I'd actually missed this. I found this today when I was going through some of the information on previous elections, that in 2020, Joe Biden, prior to his own election, hinted at interference in Turkey's 2023 elections in an interview with the New York Times editorial board. One of the most extraordinary quotes that came out of that interview is in the next slide.
Yeah.
So he basically said in this interview, it's on record, and this was prior to his election as president, "I'm still of the view that if we were to engage more directly, like I was doing with them," meaning the Turks, "that we can support those elements of the Turkish leadership that still exist and get more from them and embolden them to be able to take on and defeat Erdogan, not by a coup, he repeats, but by the electoral process." Well, I mean, I don't know what you two think, but that to me sounds very much like interference in Turkish political affairs, but still moving on. So then I recommend everybody follows this guy, MK, another one that's difficult, Badra Kumar. He was the former Indian ambassador to Turkey, gives some really excellent insights, not only into the elections, but into politics in Turkey. And basically what he says in this particular article, he points out the main reason that the US is anti-Erdogan. There are a number of reasons, one of which Erdogan has actually been throwing around accusations against the opposition of being very much pro-Western policies like LGBT and so on and so forth, and promising that he will maintain the conservative line in Turkey. So that's also kind of interesting. Kılıçdaroğlu is basically denying that. But of course, what the Indian ambassador says, the bottom line is, of course, the close, friendly, mutually beneficial relationship that Erdogan forged with Russia. Now, this has old history. He points out the new kids on the block do not know that Ataturk himself was on friendly terms with the Bolsheviks in the Cold War era too. Ankara, its NATO membership notwithstanding, maintained a certain non-alignment with the United States. Succinctly put, Erdogan has only reverted to that past, but openly, and built on it rapidly, being in a hurry to position Turkey optimally in the emerging multipolar world order. So there you have it. That's the reason why the US doesn't want Erdogan re-elected.
Thoughts?
Well, just to add to that, this is a great article here by Dr. John Arrington. It's at 21st Century, a momentous election or decisive referendum. What's at stake here is really the shape of the future Turkish state. Erdogan and the AKP party have ushered in this kind of Islamicization, and really they've suspended effectively the Kemalist republic, and they've made it they want to make it into more of an Islamic state, not like ISIS per se, but like bringing Islam more into the center of political life and social society in Turkey. So this is a fundamental. If Erdogan, AKP, lose this election, that project could be wound down. So this is a do or die and it's a long project. It's been going since 1994. This is a gradual transition. And the election, they chose the day, May 14th, the 100-year anniversary of the foundation of the Kemalist secular Turkish Republic. So very, very symbolic. So there's a lot at stake, not just on the NATO side and geopolitically, but like regionally. Turkey wants Erdogan, their vision, AKP, is to have Turkey at the center of Islamic life in the world, sort of on par where it used to be with the Ottoman Empire. So this is a big nation building, new nation building project. Make Turkey great again, or the new Turkey. Right. So Erdogan is your sort of Trump, but I think he's even more extreme than Trump. And as Vanessa said, using American tactics of Russian interference, and then based Erdogan here, he's calling the opposition gay. He said at a recent rally, he said in the run-up to this week, he said, "We know that Mr. Kemal is an LGBT person." And so he's basically saying that the CHP is LGBT, the IYI party is LGBT, the HDP is LGBT. These are all the six coalition parties that form Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu's coalition. So I think I got that right. But so you can see he's really playing on this here and basically saying that as the People's Alliance, his coalition, we are against all this, and a family is sacred to us. A strong family means a strong nation. No matter what they do, God is enough for us. So you've totally different departure here in terms of politics. Mm-hmm. So I think this is very significant, and so it'll be a make or break for this new Turkey project on Sunday.
Vanessa.
In Turkey, particularly Westerners that are living there and, are very aware of the COVID project and what's incoming through the Western-centric global power grab, are saying that Kılıçdaroğlu is the one that is going to be bringing in all of the WEF measures, the CBDC, the Digital Alliance and all the rest of it. So they are genuinely worried if he gets in. So it's kind of between a rock and a hard place, the two candidates in Turkey right now.
Yeah, Turkey's an interesting. Last thing I'll say, they're an outlier in terms of NATO. I think we can all agree. Mm. But the Erdogan government, the current Turkey, they're very realist in their worldview outlook. In other words, no close friends. It's enemies. They have enemies, but they're definitely not among of the sort of the globalist. The current Turkish regime, it's not of the globalist vein. they act in their own realist interests. And so they see eye to eye with Russia in that respect. If this new government comes in that's more pro-U.S. and the U.S. has more sway, that will change. So I think there's a lot to consider there.
Okay, thank you both. Now, if you like what the UK Column does, you would like to support us, please head over to community.ukcolumn.org. There are options to help us out there. You can pick something up at the UK Column shop, but please do share anything you find on the various platforms, especially from ukcolumn.org or ukcolumnextracts.co.uk. London tomorrow, the Truth Be Told conference. It's a public event rally taking place at 1 p.m. Trafalgar Square. You, Patrick, Dr. Mike Eden, Andrew Bridgen, Tess Laurie, Ross Jones, others speaking.
Yeah, so it looks like it's going to be a great event.
Okay, and if you aren't able to get to it, get to it if you possibly can, but if you aren't, it'll be live streamed at Children's Health Defence. The URL's on screen at the moment. Now, sticking with Andrew Bridgen, he has decided that he needs to sue Matt Hancock for the comments that Matt Hancock made with accusing Andrew Bridgen of being an anti-Semite. So this is what he said. Mr. Hancock's comments were an attempt to shut down valid concerns expressed by me. I think that's a fairly straight comment and fairly clear to be correct. Hancock, or at least a spokesman for Hancock, said this: vaccines save lives, and Matt will always defend science and progress against unfounded conspiracy theories that put people's health at risk. So I haven't seen a specific comment from Matt Hancock himself about this. Basically, Andrew Bridgen taking him to the High Court on a defamation charge, and we'll see how that goes.
Do you think they'd want to settle before trial on that? Because discovery might be a little bit uncomfortable for some people.
Well, indeed, and I think that is a very valid point. I look forward to seeing how this plays out. Okay, let's move on then. The Department of Homeland Security.
Well, I saw this up at Zero Hedge this week, Mike. This is just unbelievable. The DHS, Department of Homeland Security, they're producing videos teaching citizens how to identify radicalized conservatives in this case. And so there was a FOIA request here. This is from America First Legal, and they've obtained these documents through FOIA requests from DHS, and they're meant to depict different scenarios in which, any of us as a citizen might encounter a potentially radicalized individual. And they include some of the screenshots from this document here. It's crazy if you look at this. So this one is a suburban housewife. And so she's become radicalized here. She's got pro-life leanings. And what do you do when you run into someone like Anne? And it gives you all these different scenarios here. So you suspect she might be radicalized. How do you interface with her? Should you report her? I mean, this is like East Germany sort of Stasi stuff here. And here's another one. How do you deal with, in this case, someone at the hair salon? You've been at Anne's hairdresser for years. During one of Anne's visits, she brings up a pro-life argument and begins ranting. Should you, A, call the sheriff? Should talk to coworkers, go online to do more research about which groups Anne's talking about? Call Anne's husband, or contact Anne's pastor or preacher. Stop by her house and check and see if she's okay. So look, this is basically, here we go. So and if she brings up pro-life arguments. So this is the biggest law enforcement agency in America doing these how-to videos of how to profile all different citizens in different situations, radicalized conservatives. And the pro-life thing is big.
Who defines who is radicalized? They do.
They do. Yeah, they do. Law enforcement does. So as we know, it's totally arbitrary, like everything else, as we said on this program before. So this is just political targeting, basically, here. So I think that's, I think that's incredible. So we might have more of the same coming our way here. I'm sure that this is already something we're dealing with. And this one's interesting here. Yeah, Courtney, an old high school friend who's a budding conspiracy theorist, radicalized suspect. Courtney, in her mid-30s, divorced. What should you do if you encounter an old high school chum who's become radicalized? and it gives you a sort of how-to list of how to report them, possibly get in touch with somebody, etc. I mean, this is crazy.
So this is, as you said, pure Stasi stuff. Now, obviously, Nina Jankovic was attempting to, within the remit of the Department of Homeland Security, bring in a massive censorship regime, but this takes it to a whole new level. So this is encouraging local communities to build a culture of fear within local communities that causes people to self-censor.
And totally legitimate issues you're talking about.
Yes.
Are they too constitutional? I've seen this before in other documents, but the way that they're doing here, this is what they did with Arabs and Muslims post 9/11. This is the sort of thing that was common. So everyone's being profiled, very much like the prevent strategy in the UK. So just to compare, pretty much along the same lines. I wouldn't be surprised if they were, consulted or inspired by prevent. They thought, wow, that's working so well in the UK. Let's implement that in the United States.
Yes. Okay. Now let's come back to the UK then. And obviously, the economic news yesterday was that the Bank of England has pushed interest rates up to 4.5%. Lots of people getting very worried about that because of the implications for mortgages. This is all because inflation is too high. The bank's saying it's been around 10% since last summer. So they've raised interest rates to make sure inflation falls and stays low. But then they say we expect inflation to fall quickly this year and then meet our target, 2% target, by late 2024. And so some commentators asking, well, hold on a second. It's generally accepted that raising interest rates takes roughly 18 months to work its way through the system and have any major effect. So if they think that inflation is really going to start falling immediately, then why are they even doing this? But anyway, we'll come on to that a bit more in a second. Let's just look at what interest rates have done. As you can see, they were up around the 5-6% level around 2007, 2008. Then they collapsed to almost nothing as a result of the banking or the bailout of the banks in 2008. And since then, they've been bumbling along the bottom right up until, as we know, a couple of years ago when they started creeping back up again. We're now back up to 4.5%. This is the story that the Bank of England is saying that inflation is going to do. It's going to completely reverse itself and fall like a stone. There is no evidence whatsoever that this is the case, because although we've seen some falls in the wholesale price of energy, for example, we're not seeing those price falls coming to the retail level, and this is the fascinating bit about it. So we're seeing, for example, at every area, whether it be energy prices, food prices, even interest rates on bank accounts. If you look at the bank base rate has been rising, but that's not coming through the savings rate. So the banks are not passing this on to the consumer. So this is the main problem. But let's just briefly have a look at what Andrew Beeley, if you can stomach it, had to say yesterday about this.
Today, we've raised interest rates to 4.5% and updated our assessment of the UK economy. The economic situation is tough, but the economy is doing a bit better than we thought. Energy prices have fallen, unemployment is low, and we now think we'll manage to avoid a recession. But inflation is still too high. With food prices rising particularly fast, many people are rightly worried about the increasing cost of living. We do think inflation will fall quite sharply from now. We think it will halve by the end of the year and be back to our 2% target by the end of 2024. But we need to be sure this happens, and that's why we have raised interest rates today. Raising interest rates is the best way to make sure inflation falls and stays low. We know that isn't easy when money is tight, but it's vital we bring inflation down so that the economy can grow, create new jobs, and prosper.
So he's acknowledging that money is tight. So it's not that there's so much money sloshing around the economy that's driving the inflation, but no mention of what is driving the inflation, no mention of the massive expansion in the money supply since the coronavirus, the policies around coronavirus and the shutdown of the economy and so on. So anyway, I thought we'd just leave this particular segment with this poll on Twitter from Kevin, who asked, in your opinion, is the Bank of England corrupt? 2,791 votes when I took this screenshot this morning, and 75.8% of people believing they are. I think it goes beyond corruption. But anyway, many people now suggesting that it's time for the current leadership of the bank to go. Okay, let's move on then. Vanessa, Iraq's foreign ministry announcing that Syria is back in the club.
Yes, so on the 7th of May, and this has kind of set off a whole round of reactions from the West, predominantly from the US and the UK, which I'll come on to. The spokesman for Iraq's foreign ministry, Ahmed al-Sahaf, announced that the Arab foreign ministers who met on Sunday behind closed doors in Cairo have agreed on the return of Syria to the Arab League after nearly 12 years of suspension. I do have to add to this that many of these countries, Egypt and Saudi Arabia, Jordan, even Iraq, are also aware that they need to start pivoting east because their countries are liable to be targeted, particularly Egypt, with the explosion of events in Sudan and probably this kind of warfare to continue in Africa, as we've discussed before. But also a number of other events have gone on. It's difficult to cover all of them, but I'll take out the main ones. So Iraq, on the 10th of May, signed an agreement with Iran to expand energy ties and establish a joint office aimed at overlooking cooperation between the two countries, the Iraqi oil ministry announced, coming as part of Iranian oil minister Javad Algi's visit to Baghdad. This, of course, also seeks to fall into the de-dollarization project because, of course, the US has been sanctioning billions in Iraqi funds, which are owing to Iran, to impede cooperation between Iraq and Iran. 1/3 of electricity and gas comes from Iran to Iraq. And of course, more recently, the US has been triggering ISIS terrorist fighters to attack electrical facilities in Iraq. Many people are not aware of that. They have done that historically in Syria, but also in Iraq. Now, the next bit of good news, I've written about this in greater detail at my Substack. If people want to go there, it's the last article that was published. There is talk between Syria and Iraq of reopening the Kirkuk to Banyas pipeline. Now, historically, this pipeline was actually established in 1952 by the Bechtel Corporation, who were known probably for their savage exploitation of the 2003 unlawful aggression by the US and its allies against Iraq. And then basically it has a long history, which I detail in my article. But basically it was bombed by the US in the first Gulf War and in the second Gulf War, and in 2010 reopened. But then when the 2011 regime change war started, basically ISIS were introduced into the areas where the pipeline ran, and that made it impossible to keep it running. So the US interference to prevent this pipeline has been extensive throughout history. What will the pipeline do? It will increase the alliance between Russia and Iran, because Iran is looking at connecting to the pipeline from Iran to Iraq. It means that Iraq can bypass the Kurdish Contras that are occupying oil fields in Iraq. 12% of its oil produce comes from Kirkuk. And it means an activation of the Syrian oil processing industry in Banyas. It means an increase in trade to the maritime port connected to Banyas, etc. So it's a kind of win-win situation for Syria and Iraq, which means, of course, the US will try its best to put obstacles in the way, including sanctions and the triggering of ISIS terrorist groups. On the 10th of May, we had the quartet meeting that I mentioned between Iran, Russia, Turkey, and Syria to discuss the so-called normalization of relations between Turkey and Syria. A lot of people have published the next photo saying, look at the body language, and I do have to agree. On the left, you have His Excellency Faisal Muqdad, the Foreign Minister of Syria, and on the right, Mevlut Cavusoglu. I'm probably murdering the Turkish names, and I apologize to anyone from Turkey who's watching. And you can see there that Muqdad has a far more in-power, bullish body language compared to a rather diminutive Cavusoglu in the photo. Now, of course, we also know that Syria has dug its heels in. It has the red line that it will not normalize relations without Turkish withdrawal, both of its own military and of its terrorist proxies from Syrian territory. But however, let's look at what Sergei Lavrov said after the meeting. The process of normalization of relations between Turkey and the Syrian Arab Republic opens up new opportunities for the Astana format, which was set up in 2017 to try and find a political resolution to the crisis in Syria. According also to the foreign minister's statements, there is to be a military quartet set up in Syria between the four countries to try and also resolve the military situation. That's not mentioned in these comments, but moving on to the next slide. Facilitating the safe and voluntary return of refugees to Syria is a key principle. Well, of course, it is also for Erdogan. 5 million Syrian refugees on Turkish territory. That's a big electoral campaign strategy to get at least 1 million of those refugees returned to Syria. A roadmap for a settlement in Syria should be prepared for the next meeting of the foreign ministries of Turkey, Syria, Iran, and the Russian Federation, and later it will be presented to the presidents. The launch of the Turkish-Syrian normalization process has a positive impact on the situation in the region and the Middle East as a whole, the reasons for which have been discussed previously, but obviously for NATO, the last thing they want is normalization between Syria and Turkey, hence the interference, in my opinion, in the elections in Turkey. Now, an interesting thing that Lavrov did say, and I have also received information that this has been happening for some time. According to our data, the Americans have started to create the so-called, and I've put in brackets, new Free Syrian Army near the Syrian city of Raqqa, engaging local Arab tribes along with militants from ISIS and other terrorist organizations. The goal is clear: to use these militants against Syria's legitimate authorities in order to, again, I've added, destabilize the situation in the country. So in response to Syria's rejoining the Arab League, the club, as you called it, Mike, what is the US and, of course, the UK doing? Reigniting the terrorist war against Syrian Arab Army and its allies. So on the 10th of May, we had the Syrian Ministry of Interior put out a statement that a police vehicle had exploded within the compound of Barzeh police station. Sorry, that seems to have
I'm sorry, the text is... Yeah,
no,
sorry
it's okay. In Damascus. Now, until now, they haven't issued a statement as to what was the cause, but, you know, we've had on and off a number of terrorist sleeper cell IED attacks and detonations in Damascus. So that's another clear connection to the US displeasure. And then finally, US lawmakers introduce a bill to combat normalization with Syria's Assad. So let's have a look at what that bill entails. A bipartisan group of US lawmakers introduced a bill on Thursday intended to bar the American government from recognizing Bashar al-Assad as Syria's president and to enhance Washington's ability to impose sanctions, a warning to other countries normalizing relations with Assad. The bill would prohibit the government from recognizing or normalizing relations with any Syrian government led by Assad, who is under US sanctions, and expands on, I didn't understand how they could expand on, the Caesar Act, which imposed a tough round of sanctions on Syria in 2020 under the Trump administration. But here we go. The bill's provisions include a requirement that the Secretary of State provide Congress with a strategy for countering normalization with Assad's government, including a list of diplomatic meetings between Syria's government and Turkey, the UAE, Egypt, and others, so that means also Jordan, Iraq, etc., every year for 5 years. The legislation would also pave the way for sanctions to be imposed on airports that allow landings by Syrian Arab Airlines and another carrier, Sham Wings. If passed, the bill would also require a review of transactions, including donations over $50,000 in areas of Syria held by Assad's government by anyone in Turkey, the UAE, Egypt, and several other countries. So, the US is a very sore loser. That's about the only comment I can make on that.
Yeah.
And the question I have is, what is the remedy for lifting sanctions against Syria? What does the U.S. want? Do they want them to hand over the keys to Damascus Gate to ISIS? Is that part of the requirement for lifting sanctions? Or what have they articulated what they actually want?
I mean, the amazing thing is, all of these measures are only going to hasten the de-dollarization. And as Marco Rubio said, as soon as de-dollarization comes in, their economic warfare becomes null and void, right? So just as they're complaining about how Russia's actions alone trigger the need to supply weapons to Ukraine, everything that they're doing in the region and in Syria is triggering exactly what they don't want to happen, which is pan-Arabism, the expansion of relations between regional countries with Iran, et cetera, et cetera. So everything they're doing is pushing Syria to do exactly what they don't want them to do.
Or what they say they don't want them to do.
Well, yeah.
I mean, it's I might be being a bit cynical here, Vanessa, but I see them building an enemy for themselves.
Yeah.
The regime change is what they want.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what they want. They want regime change. That's it. That's the condition for lifting sanctions. Get rid of the government.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And so what they'll do, of course, is they'll try to annex other parts of Syria. So if they bring in the opposition candidate in Turkey, potentially they will try to get him to annex northern territory. They will continue pouring millions into the northwest, into Abu Jalani, into their cleaned up Al-Qaeda leader party. And then in the northeast, they'll try and annex territory, which Victoria Nuland has already spoken publicly about, for the so-called autonomous region for the Kurdish countries. So, yeah, if they can't achieve regime change, what they'll achieve is the control of almost all borders of Syria by hostile states and a centralized, marooned Syria.
Yep.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you for that. Now let's move back to the United States. Patrick, and Mark Anderson's been talking about the border issues in Texas over the last several weeks, but it seems to be coming to a head.
Yeah, we talked about European immigration issues, and also in Republic of Ireland, a very controversial topic at the moment there as well. But this thing in America is shaping up to be something epic. So they're bracing for the repeal of Title 42. Title 42, by the way, this photo is from a caravan in 2021. This wasn't from CNN's website, which is juxtaposing those two.
Okay.
But Title 42 basically allowed the government and Border Patrol to restrict and halt the flow of immigrants from the southern border because of COVID, to stop the spread of disease. Okay, so they're repealing that along with the other mandates and vaccine restrictions to fly into the U.S. So there's hundreds of thousands of migrants poised to come into the United States, and not just from Central America, from a total of 120 different countries. Okay, and among them, you see they're estimating there's 20,000 Chinese, there's 10,000 Russians. There's 20,000 from the Middle East, different countries, basically. So you coming through this port. So unfettered immigration, possibly here. So this is what the scene looks like in American cities. The outgoing mayor, Lori Lightfoot, declares a state of emergency over migrants arriving in Chicago. We've reached breaking point. She'll be cycled out of power any day now. But this is typical here. New York, similar problems here. Now, when you go down south into Texas, it's an even bigger issue. They're expecting the numbers could be upwards of 1 million, okay, in the coming weeks and months because of this. So here's a video clip from El Paso, Texas. This is a major border crossing. And just watch it just to get an idea. This is an American city. But go ahead and roll this clip.
Those are quite incredible scenes.
So a lot of you'll see similar scenes like this in Seattle, downtown Los Angeles. The other San Francisco comes to mind, obviously. Not all from migrants, Mike, but homeless people as well, and people with substance abuse problems and things like that. So, America's cities are already at breaking point, especially Democrat-run cities. That's not a partisan remark. It's just
a fact.
It's just a statement of fact. So they want Democrats are advocating for basically open borders. They said let them all in, and we'll deal with them once they're inside the country. And there's even Democrat lawmakers that want to let them in without checking their identity or papers or anything like that. So think about the gang problems coming, MS-13s and a whole myriad of other gangs coming from Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala. Drug cartel activities is already a huge human trafficking element to this, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry per year industry, the human trafficking industry. So, and again, and then the charities are there waiting at the border, and the NGOs to take them into their loving arms. Umpteen Catholic charities, loads of Soros-funded NGOs as well. So there's a whole political element to this that's undeniable. And I think this is probably going to be one of the most contentious election issues for the upcoming election. So brace yourself.
Okay, and we'll end today coming back to the UK. And this is a bill which is going through Parliament at the minute, the Retained EU Law Revocation and Reform Bill. This is a bill to revoke retained EU law to make provision relating to interpretation of retained EU law and its relationship with other law and so on. So what are we talking about here? Well, the current count, I believe, is something around 4,800 individual pieces of legislation. They're on the statute books as a result of the UK's membership of the European Union. Obviously, after Brexit, those were retained so for whatever reason, and the government decided that they wanted to revoke all these pieces of legislation and replace them with British legislation instead. A number of people, mostly on the Remain side of the argument, had figured that this was going to cause problems because lots of law would drop through the cracks, would be missed, and would fall off the statute book altogether. So the government in that piece of legislation was intending that the EU retained law would come off the statute books by 31st of December this year at the latest. That's all 4,800 pieces of legislation. Well, the government has now decided that they're going to reduce that number. They're going to aim for 600. They're going to choose 600 of those pieces of legislation instead by the end of the year, and they're going to put an amendment into the bill to try to make that happen. But the problem is they didn't tell Parliament, as usual, as this government does. They didn't tell Parliament before they told the press and briefed the journalists and so on. So there was a bit of an exchange in the House of Commons yesterday. I just thought we would end the programme with that. So let's just have a look at what happened.
Before we begin the urgent question, I note that it is highly regrettable that the government decided not to offer an oral statement on this matter yesterday. Given the importance of this announcement, on such matters, full engagement with Parliament and its committees is essential. Before I call the Chair, I will remind the government we are elected to hear it first, not to read it in the Telegraph, and certainly not a WMS is satisfactory on such an important matter. Hence, that I would always say, I'm now going to call the chair of the European Scrutiny Committee to ask the urgent question. Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very sorry that the sequencing that we chose was not to your satisfaction. I was...
Order. That is totally not acceptable. No. Who do you think you're speaking to, Secretary of State? I think we need to understand each other. I am the defender of this House and these benches on both sides. I am not going to be spoken to by a Secretary of State who is absolutely not accepting my ruling. Take it with good grace and accept it that members should hear it first, not a WMS or what you decide. These members have been elected by their constituents and they have the right to hear it first. And it is time this government recognised we're all elected, we're all members of Parliament, and use the correct manners. Secretary of State.
Oof.
He was a bit...
I've never seen him that lively before.
Well,
that might be his high water mark, I think.
Yeah, his high water mark.
Enthusiasm.
Yeah. So, but it is an important point. This particular government doesn't, I'm not just talking about Rishi Sunak, but going back to Liz Truss and Boris Johnson before them, they have systematically used the press in order to release this type of news instead of going to the House of Commons. And it's been a common theme that they've been criticised for that, but they don't want to follow the rules. Well, okay.
What about our democratic values and traditions? What happened to all that?
We no longer live in a democracy, Patrick. That's what happened to all that. Anyway, we'll leave it there for today. Thank you very much, Patrick and Vanessa. Thank you for joining us. We will be back in a few minutes for some extra, but just be Vanessa and me today. And we'll see you then. Otherwise, have a great weekend. And we'll be back as usual at 1 p.m. on Monday. Bye-bye.